The night she called, it felt like I'd heard a voice from the grave. Not my wife's, not my parents', but my daughter's, who had buried me in silence for 20 long years. I was eating alone, same as always, a plate of fried chicken and instant mashed potatoes growing cold under the weak glow of my kitchen light. My old radio played the evening news from Cincinnati. Voices tinny, talking about layoffs and the mayor's budget crisis. But all that vanished the moment the phone rang. It startled me, truth be told. I don't get many calls at my age. Not since Ellen passed. Not since I retired from the tire plant. Mostly wrong numbers, telemarketers, or church folks checking in. But this one shook something loose inside me before I even picked up. The caller ID showed a New York number I didn't recognize. I lifted the receiver anyway, clearing my throat. "Hello?" My voice came out rough. There was a pause so long I thought the line had gone dead. And then, soft, practiced, dangerous. "Hi, Dad. It's me, Melissa." The world tilted. The fork fell from my hand and clattered against the plate. 20 years of silence broken by 2 syllables. "Melissa." I whispered her name like it was a prayer. She continued, the rhythm of her words perfect, like she'd rehearsed them in front of a mirror. "I know it's been a long time. I saw you on the news yesterday. Congratulations on your big win." Ah, there it was. I gripped the receiver so tightly my knuckles went white. On the counter beside me sat yesterday's newspaper, folded neatly to the page where my face stared back, smiling awkwardly under a headline that read, "Local retiree wins $12 million lottery jackpot." My daughter hadn't called me when her mother died. Not when I was in the hospital after my stroke. Not when I sent birthday cards every year with no reply. She called me 24 hours after the state lottery made me rich. "Dad, I've missed you so much," she said, and her voice caught in just the right place, like an actress landing her line. I swallowed hard. 20 years, I managed. "You didn't miss me for 20 years. She didn't argue. She just let silence do the work before coming back soft, broken. I was scared, ashamed maybe, but I want to make it right. I want to see you again. My 40th birthday's next week. Come to New York. Please. For me. 40. My little girl. 40 years old. And I hadn't seen her since she stormed out of our small Ohio house at 20. The kitchen clock ticked loud. Rain streaked down the window. I could hear my own heart thudding. I should have hung up. I should have told her where to shove her invitation. But instead, like the fool I've always been where she's concerned, I heard myself say, "I'll be there." She squealed like a teenager. "Oh, Dad, that's wonderful. You'll love my friends. We have so much to catch up on." When she hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear. Her address was scrawled on the back of a grocery receipt in my shaky handwriting. A Manhattan high-rise. A world away from the life she once rejected. I stared at it like it was a map to another planet. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened the old cedar box I keep in the closet. Inside were the photographs. Melissa as a baby, on her tricycle, first day of high school. Her graduation from Ohio State, smiling in her cap and gown. 3 months later, Ellen died. And 3 days after the funeral, Melissa stood in our living room demanding money that didn't exist. "Where's Mom's life insurance?" she'd snapped, suitcase by the door, expensive shoes on her feet. "Hospital bills took everything," I told her, ashamed. She looked around our modest home with disgust. "Pathetic. I don't need this life. I don't need you." And then she was gone. Now, 20 years later, She wanted me again, because of a lottery ticket. I sat there until dawn, the pictures scattered across the coffee table like broken glass. I thought about the day I'd realized I'd won. I'd been in my flannel pajamas, sitting at this same kitchen table, holding the ticket as the numbers matched one by one. Powerball 9. Every number lined up. I remember laughing, then crying, then sitting completely still as the enormity sank in. 12 million. After taxes, 7.4s, more than I could ever spend in what years I had left. But that morning, staring at those old photographs, the money felt less like a blessing and more like bait, because I knew what was coming. Melissa hadn't called for me. She'd called for the checkbook. Still, I said I'd go. I had to see it through. I had to know how far she'd go this time. The week crawled by. I filled the silence with chores, mowing the patchy lawn, fixing the leak under the sink, writing checks for donations to the church. I told no one about my travel plans. On April 5th, I packed a small suitcase, one suit, one tie, a few changes of clothes. I tucked the photographs into a side pocket. At sunrise on April 6th, I got into my 10-year-old Chevy and started the drive east. 16 hours of highway stretched ahead of me. Ohio gave way to Pennsylvania, then New Jersey. Finally, the glittering skyline of New York rose like a mirage out of the haze. I checked into a cheap hotel in Queens. Couldn't bring myself to stay in some fancy place in Manhattan, not when I remembered how my daughter had once sneered at the worn carpet in our home. The next evening, her birthday, I stood in front of the mirror, tying the same navy tie I wore to Ellen's funeral. My reflection was older, saggier, grayer. But behind the wrinkles, there was steel. I slipped a small wrapped box into my coat pocket. Her gift. Not the kind she wanted, but the kind she'd earned. When I arrived at the address she'd given me, the doorman barely looked at me. Just another old man with a gift under his arm, heading up to the 12th floor of a glass and steel tower that smelled of money. When she opened the door, her smile nearly blinded me. "Dad!" she cried, throwing her arms around me. Perfume, champagne, expensive silk brushing my cheek. Inside, her apartment glowed with candles and chatter. 30 guests, dressed to the nines, champagne glasses raised. A hired jazz trio in the corner. Melissa steered me toward the crowd. "Everyone, meet my father, the lucky lottery winner." Heads turned, faces lit up. Suddenly, I was the most interesting man in the room. I smiled, shook hands, nodded politely. But all the while, my heart pounded with one thought. She thinks she's about to win twice. She had no idea what I'd brought with me. And no idea that tonight, her birthday party would turn into something she'd never forget. And before we continue, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments. And if this story has you hooked, give it a like and subscribe. I'll be sharing more emotional stories just like this one. The night sky over Manhattan glittered like 1,000 promises, but I knew better than to trust promises, especially from my daughter. What she called reconciliation, I knew in my bones was just another transaction. I didn't sleep much that first night in New York. The hotel bed was stiff, the hum of traffic constant. Even with the window closed, I could hear sirens slicing through the darkness and the distant rumble of trains under Queens. My thoughts chased themselves in circles, looping back to that phone call. "Hi, Dad. It's me, Melissa." I'd replayed her voice 100 times already. I knew every inflection. I knew how she let silence do the work for her, how she waited just long enough before speaking again. She'd always been that way, even as a kid. Crafty, clever, quick to spot what people wanted to hear. Back then, She used it for good grades and extra allowance. Now, I suspected, she was using it for something much larger. At 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to rest. I pulled on my jeans, walked down to the 24-hour diner across the street, and sat at the counter nursing burnt coffee. A tired waitress with too much eyeliner and not enough patience refilled my cup without asking. I stared out the window at the neon signs blinking over Roosevelt Avenue, thinking about the first time Melissa had ever said she hated me. It was 2001. She'd just turned 18. Ellen was still alive then, still fighting to keep our little family stitched together. Melissa had asked for a trip to Paris as a graduation gift. Paris, France, when I was working 60 hours a week at the tire plant just to pay for her college tuition. I'd said no. We couldn't afford it. She'd looked at me with disgust, same way she did years later after her mother died. "You'll always be small, Dad. You don't dream big enough." That night she slammed her bedroom door and blasted music loud enough to rattle the windows. Ellen had put her arm around me in the kitchen, whispering, "She doesn't mean it. She's young. She'll grow out of it." But she never did. Now here I was, in New York, 20 years later, drinking bad coffee at 3 a.m., with a suitcase in my hotel room and a wrapped box in my pocket. A birthday present, a test, and maybe, if I was honest, a punishment. The next morning, I walked the streets of Queens just to clear my head. The city was overwhelming. The crush of people, the subway roar, the horns. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry to somewhere important, while I drifted through like a ghost. I stopped in a bookstore, then a small park where kids chased pigeons. But my mind kept circling back to Melissa. Why now? Why not 2 years ago when I had a heart attack and spent 6 days in a hospital bed, praying she'd walk through the door? Why not when I sent her letters on her birthdays, each one returned unopened? No, she only came back after she saw my face on the evening news, holding a giant check with a row of grinning lottery officials behind me. I went back to my hotel around noon and turned on the television. The local channels had picked up the story. There I was again, an old man in a faded blue shirt, clutching an oversized check like it was a lifeline. The reporter had asked me what I planned to do with the money. I'd said something about fixing up the house, maybe donating to local charities. I'd been careful not to mention family. I thought I was protecting myself. Instead, I'd painted a target on my back. By late afternoon, I'd made up my mind. If Melissa wanted me back in her life because of money, then I'd play along, but not the way she expected. She thought she was setting the stage for me to save her. In truth, I was setting the stage for her to face herself. On April 7th, her birthday, I put on my suit, the one Ellen bought me for our 25th anniversary. Navy blue, a little tight in the shoulders now. I tied my tie slowly, hands trembling, not with nerves, but with something deeper. I took the subway into Manhattan. It was my first time riding underground in years. People stared at their phones, earbuds in, lives moving at light speed. I clutched my suitcase, thinking of how far I was from my quiet house in Ohio. When I surfaced on East 73rd Street, the buildings towered above me, sleek glass and stone, a canyon of wealth. My daughter lived here now, high above the streets in a penthouse that probably cost more in a month than I made in a year at the plant. I stood outside for a long time, staring up at the glittering windows. Finally, I walked in. The doorman checked my name, nodded, and gestured me toward the elevator. My ears popped as it climbed 12 floors. Then the doors slid open, and there she was. "Dad!" Melissa's voice rang out like champagne. She looked radiant, draped in silk, her blonde hair swept up just so. She hugged me tightly, perfume clouding my senses. For a second, just a second, I let myself believe it. That she missed me. That she meant it. That we could have another chance. Then she pulled back, her eyes bright with calculation. "Come in. Everyone's dying to meet you." Everyone. That's when I noticed the party. 30 people in elegant clothes, laughing, sipping wine, a jazz trio playing softly in the corner. Every conversation seemed to stop when I walked in. Heads turned, smiles spread. I was the guest of honor and I hadn't even opened my mouth yet. "Everyone," Melissa announced proudly. "This is my father, the lottery winner." The room erupted with polite applause. Strangers swarmed me, shaking my hand, asking questions, congratulating me. They wanted to know about my plans, my investments, my vision. Not one of them asked about me, about my health, about my years alone in that Ohio house, about Ellen. Just money. Always money. I smiled, nodded, gave vague answers. All the while, my fingers brushed against the small wrapped box in my coat pocket. Her gift. Waiting. As the evening wore on, I watched Melissa work the room. She was in her element, laughing, flattering, telling stories about her career in business. But beneath the shine, I caught things others didn't. The stack of unopened bills on her counter, the slightly frayed hem of her designer dress, the way she kept glancing toward me, as if to remind everyone where her new fortune lay. At one point, she leaned close and whispered, "Dad, I'm so glad you're here. I can't tell you how much this means to me." Her hand rested lightly on my arm, but her eyes flickered toward a group of men in suits across the room. Investors, no doubt. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just a birthday party. It was a sales pitch. And I was the bait. She wanted her wealthy father in the room to lure new backers, to prove she had stability, connections, money behind her. She thought my presence gave her credibility. My chest burned with a mix of anger and heartbreak. But I kept smiling. I kept playing my part. Because if she thought I was her pawn, she was about to learn how wrong she was. At 7:55, I drifted toward the doorway. The wrapped box in my pocket felt heavy, almost alive. The jazz trio shifted into something brighter. The guests grew louder with drink. Melissa raised her glass, preparing to make some grand announcement about her new business venture. But then the doorbell rang. Once, twice, sharp, insistent. The sound cut through the party like a blade. Melissa frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone else, but she smoothed her dress, forced a smile, and headed toward the door. I stayed where I was, near the entryway, watching. My heart pounded, because I knew who was standing on the other side. The sound of that doorbell didn't belong in a party. It belonged in a courtroom. The second chime echoed through the apartment, sharp and unwelcome. But Melissa didn't let it show. Not yet. She glanced at me, just a flicker of irritation, and then plastered her brightest smile back on. "Excuse me, everyone. Probably another guest running late." She moved gracefully across the marble floor, heels clicking in rhythm with the jazz trio. The guests kept talking, though a subtle ripple of curiosity passed through them. Who would arrive unannounced at an Upper East Side birthday party? I stayed near the entryway, arms folded loosely, heart beating a little faster. My hand brushed the wrapped box in my pocket, though the real gift was already waiting outside. Melissa turned the handle and pulled open the door. Her face froze. On the threshold stood 3 figures. Not party guests, not friends, not late arrivals. Their expressions were too sharp, their clothes too businesslike. They weren't here to toast champagne. They were here for something colder. I recognized them from the photographs I'd studied, From the articles I'd printed at home in Ohio, Alex Rivers, the venture capitalist, Sarah King, the lawyer, Mike Thorne, the betrayed entrepreneur. Melissa blinked, then recovered fast, voice rising an octave. "I'm sorry, this is a private party." But Alex Rivers held up a leather briefcase like a badge. "Melissa Carter?" His voice was calm, steady, as if he'd rehearsed this 100 times. She faltered. "Yes, but we need to talk." The nearest conversations faltered. Guests leaned in, curious. The jazz trio's music suddenly felt awkward, too cheerful for the tension at the door. Melissa forced a laugh. "I think you've got the wrong person." But Sarah King stepped forward, her tone cool, professional, merciless. "No mistake. Green Tech Solutions, Urban Fresh Markets, Tech Bridge Consulting, all dissolved, all under investigation, and all with you as CEO." Melissa's champagne glass trembled. She set it down quickly, hoping no one noticed. "That's ridiculous. Those were startups. Every entrepreneur has setbacks." Mike Thorne's voice broke through, low and raw. "You call stealing my daughter's college fund a setback?" The words cut like broken glass. Even across the room, I felt the sting of them. Melissa flinched. For the first time all night, her mask slipped. The room shifted. Guests who had come to sip champagne and flatter their hostess now leaned back, murmuring, some already edging toward the door. Phones appeared. Cameras clicked. In Manhattan, scandal travels faster than jazz. Melissa's eyes darted from one accuser to the next, then back to me. And for the first time in 20 years, she looked like the little girl who once scraped her knee and ran crying into my arms. "Dad," she said, voice shaking, "what's going on? Who are these people?" I met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "They're your past, sweetheart, and it just caught up with you." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Behind her, Alex Rivers stepped into the apartment, setting his briefcase on the coffee table as if it were a courtroom bench. Papers spilled out. Contracts, bank statements, fraud reports, evidence heavy enough to bury her in legal debt. Sarah King followed, sliding a thick folder from her bag. "Federal complaints have already been filed. Tonight we're here to give you formal notice. You'll be served in the morning." The guests gasped, a ripple spreading through the room like wind across water. Melissa turned back to me, her eyes wild now. You brought them here." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Her voice rose, cracking under the pressure. "You vindictive old man. You think this makes us even? After all those years you abandoned me?" The accusation hit me square in the chest, but I stood my ground. "You walked out, Melissa. You turned your back on this family because love wasn't worth anything if it didn't come with a dollar sign." She shook her head violently, strands of hair slipping from her carefully pinned style. "No, you're wrong. I built a life. I had opportunities. Mike Thorne cut her off, his voice shaking with fury. "You built it on lies. You built it on us. And tonight, the lies stop." The party was unraveling fast. Guests whispered. Some pulled their coats from the rack, eager to disappear before their names were connected to the scandal. Others lingered, hungry to watch the train wreck unfold. The jazz trio had fallen silent, instruments limp in their hands. Melissa looked around, desperate for an ally. But where there had been admirers, now there was distance. Finally, she spun back to me, eyes blazing. "How could you do this to your own daughter?" I took a breath, slow, steady. "You did this to yourself. Actions have consequences. Always." Her lip trembled, then curled into a snarl. "You'll regret this. Both of us will." I shook my head. "No. For the first time in 20 years, I don't think I will. Sarah King laid the official documents on the coffee table, her voice crisp as she addressed the shrinking crowd. For anyone present, this is a matter of public record. Evidence of fraud, pending litigation, and criminal charges. You may wish to distance yourselves professionally. That was all it took. Half the room emptied within minutes, murmuring apologies, eyes averted. The champagne glasses on the counters remained half full, abandoned. Melissa stood frozen in the center of it all. Her birthday party turned tribunal. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small wrapped box. Her eyes flicked to it, suspicion warring with hope. I set it gently on the coffee table, right beside the stack of legal documents. "Happy birthday," I said softly. Then I turned and walked out. The elevator doors closed behind me, sealing off the muffled chaos upstairs. I exhaled for the first time in hours. My hands shook, not from fear, but from release. 20 years of silence. 20 years of wondering if she cared. Tonight, I had my answer. I stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, the city alive with noise and light. But for me, there was only silence. And, strangely, peace. The night I walked out of that apartment, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like I'd finally closed a door I'd been holding open for 20 years, waiting for someone who never meant to walk back through. The taxi ride back to Queens was quiet. The driver didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. Manhattan glittered outside the window, each high-rise full of people chasing money, chasing status, chasing the same illusions that had swallowed my daughter whole. When I reached the hotel, I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the bed, still wearing my suit. My hands smelled faintly of her perfume from that fake embrace at the doorway. I rubbed at them until the smell was gone. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I turned on the television, and there she was, Melissa, already splashed across the late-night news. Birthday bash turns into confrontation for Manhattan entrepreneur. The footage was grainy, shot on cell phones by guests who hadn't left quickly enough. It showed Melissa's frozen smile, the legal documents spread across her table, the trio of investors delivering accusations while horrified guests looked on. I sat there in the dark hotel room, the glow of the television flickering across my face, and I felt something strange. Not victory, not revenge, something quieter, something like justice. The next morning, it was everywhere. Newspapers on the corner stands, radio talk shows dissecting it, Twitter hashtags trending her name, fraud queen, birthday bust, Upper East Side scam artist exposed. She was no longer Melissa Carter, ambitious entrepreneur. She was a punchline. I bought a coffee and a paper at a bodega and read the coverage while sitting on a bench in Queens Plaza. Reporters called it a stunning public collapse. They cited pending lawsuits, federal investigations. They mentioned victims, retirees, small business owners, families who'd invested their savings. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't give interviews. I wasn't mentioned by name, thank God. To the world, I was just an anonymous father at the party, forgotten in the larger drama. That was exactly how I wanted it. By noon, I was already driving west, leaving New York behind me. The April sky was gray, rain spitting on the windshield as the highway unwound. I passed through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, the Appalachians. Each mile felt like another layer of weight lifting from my shoulders. Somewhere near Pittsburgh, I stopped at a diner for lunch. A young couple sat in the booth beside me, their baby fussing in a high chair while they tried to split a plate of fries and a club sandwich. The father's hands were calloused, the mother's eyes ringed with exhaustion. I caught myself staring at them, remembering Ellen and me when Melissa was little. We never had much, but we had each other. Love was enough, until Melissa decided it wasn't. The couple smiled at me as they left, apologizing for the noise. I waved them off. My throat was tight. I paid my check and got back on the road. When I reached Ohio late that night, my little house looked the same as it always had. The paint peeling on the porch, the same sagging mailbox, the same tired flower beds Ellen had once tended with such care. I carried my suitcase inside, hung up my suit, and sat in the recliner where I'd spent so many lonely evenings. The photographs of Melissa still sat on the coffee table, waiting like ghosts. But this time, I didn't cry over them. I gathered them up, tucked them back in the cedar box, and slid it onto the highest shelf of the closet. Not to forget her, but to stop letting her haunt me. The following days brought more headlines. The FBI confirmed investigations into multiple companies tied to Melissa. Investors spoke out about the lies she'd told. Footage from the party circulated online, dissected frame by frame. She didn't call me again. For the first time in years, the silence felt like a gift. Instead, I found myself staring at the lottery check framed on the wall. $12 million. More money than I'd ever dreamed of. More money than I'd ever need. But for what? Not for Melissa. Not anymore. I remembered Ellen's voice, steady and clear even in her final days. Money isn't meant to sit still. It's meant to move, to help, to heal. She'd said that after we sold the last of our savings to cover her treatments. She said it again when we scraped together donations for a neighbor's funeral. Money as water, not stone. I sat at the kitchen table one evening, staring at a blank notebook. And slowly, I began to write. Ideas, plans, the kind of things Ellen would have wanted. Emergency medical fund for local families. Scholarship for kids whose parents worked factory shifts like I did. Mortgage help for veterans who came home broken. The list grew, page after page. My handwriting shaky but determined. It wasn't about legacy. It wasn't about glory. It was about turning luck into lifeline. Because if Melissa had taught me anything, it was this. Wealth without love corrodes. But love, properly guided, could turn wealth into something unbreakable. One evening, about a week after the party, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. Mr. Carter? The voice was careful, professional. This is Agent Morales, FBI White Collar Crimes Division. We understand you attended your daughter's birthday party in Manhattan. We'd like to ask a few questions about what you witnessed. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly. Here it was, the official weight of the government pressing down. But I wasn't afraid. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't afraid at all. The first time I spoke to the FBI, my hands shook so badly I had to grip the receiver with both. Not because I'd done anything illegal, but because I knew how close I'd come to crossing that line. Agent Morales' voice was even, professional. She asked if I had a few minutes to answer questions about the events at Melissa Carter's birthday party in New York. I said yes. I described what I'd seen. The investors arriving at the door, the confrontation, the documents spread across her coffee table. I told her about the way the guests scattered, about Melissa's outburst, about how I'd left quietly afterward. She asked if I'd known those three people before that night. For a moment, my throat closed. I thought about the emails I'd sent from an anonymous account, about the late nights hunched over my ancient computer in Ohio, printing articles and addresses, tying together the threads of my daughter's fraud. If I told the truth, they'd know I'd engineered the whole thing. They might call it obstruction, interference, maybe even entrapment. But if I lied outright, they'd know. The FBI always knows. So I told a half-truth. I recognized them from news stories afterward, I said carefully. That night, they just seemed like strangers who knew too much. The silence on the other end stretched for 3 beats, long enough to make sweat bead at my temple. Then Agent Morales' tone softened. Mr. Carter, I want you to understand, you're not under investigation. We're looking at your daughter. She's facing serious charges. We just needed to confirm some details. Relief swept through me like a tide. My grip on the phone loosened. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my trembling hands. I hadn't lied, not exactly, but I hadn't confessed either. And maybe that was justice too. Melissa had spent her whole life twisting the truth to her advantage. For once, I'd bent it just enough to protect myself, and the cause I was beginning to imagine. That night, I dreamed of Ellen. She stood in our backyard, hands on her hips, scolding me gently the way she used to. "You always were stubborn, John," she said, though her lips never moved. "But you know what to do now. Don't waste time chasing ghosts. Use what you have. Help people who need it." I woke with tears on my pillow. The house was silent, but in that silence, I felt her presence more than I had in years. The next morning, I drove into town. The old Chevy rattled down Main Street, past the shuttered hardware store, the thrift shop, the boarded-up movie theater. This town had been slowly dying since the factory cut half its shifts. Families were moving out. Houses sat empty. I parked in front of the bank and walked in, lottery account paperwork in my pocket. The manager, a woman named Mrs. Phillips, greeted me warmly. She'd known Ellen, had even brought us casseroles when Ellen was sick. She led me into a small office, and I laid out my plan. "I want to set up a charitable foundation," I said, "in my wife's name, to help families in this county who get hit with medical bills they can't pay. Families like ours used to be." Mrs. Phillips's eyebrows rose, but she nodded slowly. "That's a beautiful idea, Mr. Carter. We can help you make it official. You'd need to choose a board, set terms for disbursement, decide on oversight." I waved a hand. "Show me the paperwork. I'll figure out the rest." For the first time since I'd won, I felt like the money wasn't burning a hole in my life. It was starting to take shape. That evening, I drove out to Ellen's grave. The cemetery was quiet, just the rustle of wind through the trees and the crunch of gravel under my shoes. Her headstone was simple: Ellen Carter, beloved wife and mother. I knelt, brushing leaves off the stone. "It's happening, Elle," I whispered. "Your name's going on something good, something real. Not just a check in a bank, not just a story in the news. A fund that'll carry on what you believed." The breeze stirred, lifting the gray hairs at my temple. I closed my eyes, imagining her smile. But as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the thought of Melissa. The news said she was out on bail, hiding from reporters in her apartment. Commentators debated whether she'd get 5 years, 10, or more. Her lawyer claimed she was misunderstood, that startups fail all the time. I knew better. Still, part of me wondered, was there any piece of the girl Ellen and I had raised left inside her? Or had greed devoured her completely? I didn't know the answer, but I knew this. For the first time in decades, her choices no longer controlled mine. And that freedom was worth more than $12 million. The day I signed the papers for the foundation, I felt lighter than I had in years. The day Melissa stood before a federal judge, she looked older than I'd ever seen her. Mrs. Phillips, the bank manager, met me in the conference room with a stack of documents. A lawyer she'd recommended sat across the table, explaining bylaws and oversight committees. I nodded along, signing where they pointed, my hands steadier than they'd been when I'd first held that winning ticket. When the last page was complete, the lawyer pushed his glasses up and smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. The Ellen Carter Memorial Fund is now a legal entity." Hearing her name, my Ellen's name, attached to something living, something bigger than our little house and our little life, nearly broke me. I swallowed hard and said, "Now, let's put it to work." We seeded the fund with $2 million. Enough to make a dent, but not enough to empty my winnings. I wanted the money to move slow, to ripple outward, not to drown anyone in a sudden wave. The first family we helped was the Hendersons, a young couple with a 6-year-old boy named Caleb, recently diagnosed with a heart defect. They'd mortgaged their house twice and still couldn't cover the surgery. I met them in a cramped hospital waiting room. The mother's eyes were swollen from crying, the father's hands cracked from construction work. When I told them the foundation would cover the hospital's bill, they both broke down sobbing. The father tried to shake my hand, but ended up hugging me instead. I hadn't been hugged like that in years. "You saved my boy's life," he whispered. I shook my head. "No, the doctors will do that. I'm just helping open the door." Walking out of that hospital, I felt taller, stronger. Like maybe Ellen was walking beside me, her hand in mine. Meanwhile, the news about Melissa got darker. She appeared in court in Manhattan, pale and drawn, her once perfect posture bent under the weight of cameras. Federal prosecutors listed charges: wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy. Reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Carter, do you deny stealing over $1 million from investors? Ms. Carter, did you use your father's lottery win to lure new backers?" She said nothing, just kept her chin high, lips pressed thin. Seeing her on television was like watching a stranger. She wore the same expensive clothes, the same bright lipstick, but the light in her eyes, the ambition, the spark, was gone. All that was left was calculation. I muted the TV, heart heavy. The foundation grew quickly. Word spread in town. Families came forward with medical bills, foreclosure notices, tuition debts. Some cases we approved, others we referred to other programs, but each decision carried Ellen's spirit. I hired 2 women from church, Mrs. Green, a retired nurse, and Angela, a single mom with bookkeeping skills, to help manage the applications. We set up a small office inside the community center where Ellen used to volunteer. Her photograph went up on the wall, Ellen holding a stack of library books, smiling that gentle smile that had carried me through so many storms. "Every check we sign," I told the small staff, "is in her name. Make sure people know it's Ellen helping them, not me." But some nights, when the house was quiet, I'd catch myself thinking about Melissa. Did she sit alone in her apartment, hating me for what I'd done? Did she regret any of it? Or was she still scheming, still finding angles, still plotting her escape? Part of me wanted to believe that prison, if it came to that, might teach her what I never could. That people matter more than profit. That family matters more than fortune. But another part of me knew better. Melissa had been chasing money for so long, it had replaced the blood in her veins. One afternoon in June, I received a letter from the Department of Justice. They thanked me for my cooperation, confirmed Melissa's case was moving forward, and informed me that as her father, I had the right to submit a victim impact statement if I wished. The phrase made me pause. Victim? Had I been her victim? Yes. For 20 years. Abandoned, rejected, erased from her life. But sitting there at my kitchen table, I realized I no longer felt like one. Not since the day I walked out of her apartment. leaving the truth on the table like a birthday cake she never wanted. By July, the foundation had helped over a dozen families. A veteran got to keep his house. A grandmother raising 3 kids received help with her insulin costs. A teenager from my old neighborhood got a scholarship to trade school. At every turn, I saw Ellen's hand in it. And every time I signed a check, I thought about Melissa, how she'd once demanded money from me after her mother's funeral, calling me pathetic. Now, finally, I wasn't. On the night of her sentencing hearing, I sat in front of the TV. Melissa stood before the judge in a gray suit, looking smaller than I remembered. The prosecutor listed the crimes. The defense begged for leniency. Melissa didn't look at the cameras. She didn't speak except to whisper, "Yes, Your Honor," when asked if she understood. The judge's gavel came down hard. 6 years in federal prison. Restitution ordered. Assets seized. The reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, but Melissa didn't stop. She was led into a waiting van, eyes straight ahead, face expressionless. For the first time, I believed she might actually be broken. I turned off the TV. The house was quiet, but not lonely. On the kitchen table sat the latest batch of foundation applications, waiting for my review. Outside, the cicadas hummed in the Ohio summer heat. I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat down with the files. My daughter was going to prison. My wife's name was living on through hope. And me? I was finally free. The day I went to see Melissa in prison, I almost turned the car around twice. But something in me knew this story couldn't end with silence. Not again. The prison sat outside of Columbus, a sprawling compound of gray concrete and razor wire that looked more like a fortress than a place for rehabilitation. The guard at the gate checked my ID, had me sign a visitor log, and directed me to the parking lot. I sat in my Chevy for a long time, staring at the chain-link fences topped with coils of barbed wire. Inside those walls, my daughter was serving 6 years for crimes she'd convinced herself weren't crimes at all. I thought about Ellen, about what she'd say if she knew I was here. She'd probably tell me forgiveness doesn't mean foolishness, that sometimes mercy comes in the form of telling someone the truth they don't want to hear. So I got out of the truck and walked to the entrance. The visitation room was nothing like the movies. No glass panes, just rows of metal tables bolted to the floor, plastic chairs on either side, guards at the corners, keeping watch. When they brought her in, my chest tightened. Melissa looked smaller. Prison uniform, no makeup, hair pulled back tight. She still carried herself with a kind of brittle dignity, but her eyes gave her away. They were flat, tired, rimmed with shadows. She spotted me and froze. For a second, I thought she'd turn and walk back out. But instead, she sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table. "Dad," she said softly. Her voice still carried that same practiced music, but the edges were frayed now. I nodded. "Melissa." We sat in silence for a long time. The sounds of other families murmuring around us filled the space. The hum of vending machines, the scrape of chairs, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Finally, she leaned forward. "Why did you do it? Why did you bring them to my birthday? You could have warned me. You could have spared me that humiliation." I kept my eyes on hers. Because humiliation isn't the same as consequence. You've spent your life dodging the truth, Melissa. Dodging responsibility. That night, the truth finally walked through your door. Her lips pressed together, trembling. "You think you were teaching me some lesson? Like I'm a child who stole a candy bar?" I shook my head. "No. You're a grown woman who stole millions. from people who trusted you, from families who will never get back what you took. You needed to see their faces. You needed to hear their voices. Her eyes glistened, but the tears didn't fall. For a long moment, she looked away, staring at the scratched tabletop. Then, so quietly, I almost didn't hear. "I thought you hated me." That hit me harder than I expected. "I never hated you," I said. My throat tightened. "I hated what you did. I hated what you became. But I never hated you. You're my daughter. I've been waiting 20 years for you to come home. I just didn't realize, when you finally did, it would be in handcuffs." Her head dropped into her hands, shoulders shaking. For the first time since the party, I believed her tears were real. We sat that way for a while, me staring at the cinder-block wall, her crying quietly. Finally, she wiped her eyes and whispered, "They'll never forgive me. Not the investors, not the court, not you." I leaned in. "Melissa, forgiveness doesn't mean you get to skip the sentence. It doesn't erase the damage. But maybe it's a place to start again. You've got 6 years in here. You can use them to get bitter. Or you can use them to get better." She looked up, eyes red. "And you? Do you forgive me?" The words hung between us like smoke. I thought about the foundation, about the families whose bills we'd paid, about Ellen's photograph on the wall at the community center. I thought about Melissa storming out of the house all those years ago, calling me pathetic. I thought about the little girl who used to hold my hand at county fairs, who used to call me her hero. "I don't know if I'm there yet," I admitted, "but I'm trying. For your mother's sake. For mine. Maybe even for yours." A guard tapped his watch. Visiting time almost over. Melissa reached across the table. Her hands looked smaller than I remembered, fingers trembling. For a second, I hesitated. Then I put my hand in hers. Her grip was desperate, like someone hanging off the edge of a cliff. "I don't want to die in here, Dad," she whispered. "I don't want to be remembered like this." I squeezed her hand gently. "Then change the story. You've got time to start writing a new ending." When the guard called time, I stood. Melissa stayed seated, eyes following me as I walked away. Just before the door closed behind me, I glanced back. She was still there, staring at her hands, as if trying to memorize the feel of mine. Driving home, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and peace. Sorrow for what she'd become. Peace for finally saying the words we both needed to hear. The road stretched out before me, long and empty. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone on it. Ellen was with me. And maybe, just maybe, part of Melissa was too. Letters started arriving 2 months after my visit. Her handwriting was the same, slanted, neat, a little dramatic, like she was still trying to impress a teacher. The first one came on plain prison stationery, folded 3 times, my name and address written carefully across the envelope. I nearly tossed it in the cedar box with the photographs, but something stopped me. Inside, the letter was short. "Dad, thank you for visiting me. I know I don't deserve it. I think about what you said every night. Maybe this place can be a start instead of an ending. I'll write again soon. Love, Melissa." I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe those words were more than another performance, but the father in me, the one who'd been burned for 2 decades, kept whispering, "Be careful. Don't get fooled again." The foundation kept me busy. Word of mouth spread fast. Families who'd once hidden their shame about overdue bills started showing up at our community center, heads bowed, voices trembling. We helped a retired teacher cover cancer treatments. A single dad pay for his son's asthma medication. A waitress keep her house after her husband abandoned her with 2 kids. Each case reminded me of the years Ellen and I scraped by, making impossible choices. Each case reminded me why I was doing this. One afternoon, as I was leaving the center, a young boy ran up and hugged me around the waist. He was about 8, with freckles and a mop of brown hair. "Thank you, mister," he said breathlessly. "My mom said I get to keep going to school 'cause of you." I knelt down, my throat tight. "No, son, because of your mom. She's the one fighting for you." I just gave her a little help. But as I watched him run off, backpack bouncing, I thought, this is my family now. Melissa's second letter arrived a few weeks later. "Dad, I signed up for a literacy program. I'm helping some of the women here who can't read. It feels strange. Teaching, I mean, but maybe good strange. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm trying. I think Mom would like that." I read that one 3 times. She was invoking her mother now. Ellen, the one person whose memory Melissa had never dared to taint before. Was it manipulation? Maybe. But a part of me, a tired, hopeful part, wanted to believe she was reaching for something real. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside Ellen's cedar box, beside the photographs. Summer turned to fall. The leaves in Ohio burned orange and gold, carpeting the cemetery where Ellen rested. I brought her flowers on her birthday, kneeling by the headstone. "Elle," I whispered, "she's writing me. Says she's teaching other inmates. I don't know if it's true, but maybe she's listening. Maybe she's finally listening." The wind moved through the trees, and for a moment I swore I heard Ellen's laugh. Gentle, skeptical, but warm. By November, the foundation had processed over 50 cases. The local paper ran a story with the headline, "Lottery winner turns fortune into lifeline for families." Reporters tried to get me to comment about Melissa, but I always shook my head. "This isn't about her," I told them. "This is about Ellen. This is about our neighbors." Still, at night, I kept rereading Melissa's letters. Each one was longer than the last. She wrote about the classes, about volunteering in the prison kitchen, about a book club she'd joined. She even admitted to her arrogance. "Dad, I thought I was better than everyone else. Out here, I can't hide. I'm just another woman in a gray uniform. And maybe that's the best thing that ever happened to me." I stared at that line for a long time. Was it true? Or was it just another story, crafted by the same daughter who once convinced investors to pour hundreds of thousands into businesses that didn't exist? I didn't know, but I kept reading. One night, in late December, she ended her letter with, "I dream about coming home. Not to Manhattan, not to fancy parties. Just home. With you, if you'll let me. I don't want money anymore. I just want family. Do you believe me?" I sat by the fire for hours, letter in my lap, the Christmas tree twinkling faintly in the corner. Do I believe her? The truth was, I didn't know if I ever would. But maybe believing wasn't the point. Maybe the point was that, for the first time in decades, Melissa wanted something other than money. And maybe that was enough. When the letter from the parole board arrived, I held it in my hands for a long time before opening it. 6 years had felt like both forever and no time at all. It was spring in Ohio again. The air smelled of cut grass and rain. The Ellen Carter Memorial Fund had grown beyond anything I'd expected. We had volunteers, donors, even a small office staff. Families came not just from my county, but from neighboring towns, asking for help with bills, with medical crises, with tuition. I'd become something of a local figure. People nodded at me in the grocery store, stopped me in the diner to shake my hand. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt like a man finally doing what his wife would have wanted. But that letter, with the state seal stamped in the corner, brought me back to a part of my life I'd almost managed to bury. It said Melissa Carter was up for parole, and that as her father, I could testify, either in support of her release or against it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with her old letters spread out in front of me. Dad, I'm helping women learn to read. Dad, I just want family now, not money. Dad, do you believe me? I read them again and again, looking for cracks, for tells, for the manipulation I'd come to expect. Some parts felt genuine. Others still sounded like performance. I poured a glass of whiskey and stared at Ellen's photograph on the mantel. What do I do, Elle? I whispered. Do I give her another chance? Or do I protect the world from her? The silence in the house pressed back. The day of the hearing, I drove 3 hours to the state correctional facility. The same gray walls, the same barbed wire. I signed in, my hands sweaty despite the cool morning air. The hearing room was small, just a few tables, 3 board members, a court reporter. Melissa sat at one end in a neat prison uniform, hair pulled back, eyes fixed on the floor. When she finally looked up at me, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not calculation, not arrogance, something like fear. The board asked her questions, what she'd learned, how she'd changed, what she planned to do if released. I've learned that shortcuts cost more than they give, she said. Her voice was steady, but softer than I remembered. I hurt people. I can't undo that, but I can try to live differently now. I want to work with people who've been through what I've been through. I want to be honest. Then they turned to me. Mr. Carter, would you like to make a statement? I stood slowly, my knees stiff, my throat dry. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just looked at my daughter, the girl who once left our house with cruel words, the woman who built empires on lies, the inmate now asking for another chance. I won't lie to you, I began. My voice cracked, but I kept going. Melissa hurt people, not just strangers, but me. She abandoned her family for money. For years, I thought there was no part of her worth saving. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I took a deep breath. But I've read her letters. I've seen something. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if it's real. But I know that if Ellen were standing here, she'd say everyone deserves at least one honest chance to change. The board scribbled notes. I swallowed hard. So I'm not here to beg for her release. I'm here to say this. If you believe she's ready, then let her try. If she fails, that's on her. But if she succeeds, maybe we'll all be better for it. Then I sat down. My hands trembled in my lap. The board deliberated for 15 minutes that felt like 15 hours. Melissa sat with her head bowed, lips moving silently. Maybe a prayer, maybe a plea. Finally, the chairperson spoke. Parole granted. Effective in 60 days, pending transitional housing arrangements. Melissa gasped. Her shoulders sagged with relief. I didn't smile. I just closed my eyes and whispered to Ellen in my head, I hope this isn't a mistake. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with an email from the foundation staff. Another success story. A young mother's medical debt cleared. A scholarship awarded to a boy entering nursing school. I pulled over at a rest stop, opened my laptop, and read the updates. Photographs of smiling families, thank you letters from strangers, Stories of hope stitched together with Ellen's name at the center of it all. For the first time, I realized the foundation had grown beyond me. It wasn't just my work anymore. It was a community's work, and maybe that was the answer. Melissa would get her chance, but my legacy, Ellen's legacy, was already safe, already strong, already carried forward by countless others. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the sky turning gold with evening. Whatever happened with my daughter, I'd done my part. And for once, that felt like enough. The day Melissa walked out of prison, the sky was gray, heavy with spring rain. It felt like the world itself didn't know whether to mourn or celebrate. I stood in the parking lot outside the correctional facility, leaning on my old Chevy, hands stuffed into my jacket pockets. She didn't wipe them away. "I'm different now," she said quickly, almost defensively. "I worked, I studied, I kept my head down. I know people won't believe me, but I want to try again. I don't care about money. I just want a life." Her voice trembled. I studied her face, every line, every shadow, searching for the little girl Ellen and I had once raised, searching for truth. Finally, I said, "Words are easy, Melissa. Life is harder. Show me. Don't tell me." She nodded, tears mixing with rain. That night, I let her stay in the spare bedroom. The house felt strange with her inside it again. Ghosts and memories pressed at the walls. I sat in the recliner, staring at the cedar box of photographs, listening to her footsteps creak overhead. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Trust wasn't something you rebuild in a night or a year, maybe not ever. But I also knew this. I had finally drawn the line. My life wasn't hers to break anymore. My love wasn't a currency she could spend. I hadn't planned on being here, but something pulled me anyway. Maybe curiosity, maybe obligation, maybe that stubborn hope I could never quite shake. The gates buzzed open. A handful of women shuffled out, clutching plastic bags with their belongings. Then I saw her, Melissa. She looked thinner, older. Her blonde hair streaked with gray now, her uniform replaced by donated clothes that didn't quite fit. For a second, she didn't see me. She just stood there, staring at the sky like she couldn't believe it was real. Then her eyes found mine. She froze. "Dad," she whispered. I nodded once. "Melissa." She walked toward me slowly, as if afraid I might vanish if she moved too fast. When she reached me, she stopped just short, eyes searching my face. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "Neither did I admitted. We stood in silence, the rain beginning to fall, soft at first, then steadier. Drops clung to her lashes. We drove in silence back toward Ohio. She stared out the window most of the way, watching the countryside roll past. At a gas station stop, she asked quietly, "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. "I don't hate you. I never did. But I don't trust you either. That's something you'll have to earn back." Her shoulders sagged with relief anyway, as if the absence of hate was enough to keep her going. When we pulled into town, I took her not to my house, but to the community center. The Ellen Carter Memorial Fund sign gleamed above the door. Inside, volunteers bustled. Families sat in folding chairs filling out applications. Kids played in a corner with donated toys. Ellen's photograph watched over it all. Melissa stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the framed picture of her mother. "She'd be proud," she whispered. I looked at her sharply. "Would she?" Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. Maybe not of me, but of you." For the first time, she sounded honest. She could walk beside me if she chose, or she could walk away again. Either way, I would keep going. Because Ellen's legacy was alive. Because families still needed help. Because the boy with freckles still deserved his scholarship. And the Henderson kid still needed his checkups. Because love, real love, wasn't about money. It was about showing up again and again, even when it hurt. The rain eased by dawn. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, watching the sky turn pale gold over Ohio fields. Melissa appeared in the doorway behind me, barefoot, hesitant. "Dad?" she asked softly. I turned. For once, there was no script in her voice, no performance, just a question hanging between us. "Do you think we can start over?" I sipped my coffee, staring out at the horizon. "I think," I said slowly, "we can start." Whether we'd ever make it to over was another story. But for the first time in a long, long time, I was willing to find out.